People don't believe that in this planet there are stateless people, but I do exist. Those are just some of the sentiments of stateless people around the world. This is a global conversation. Like I told you, you can be part of it. Use the hashtag Worldview KTN. Let's have this conversation because, like I said, not so many people are even aware that these people exist. So in studio with me, I have Ismail Ramadan from the Nubian community here in Kenya. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on Worldview.
Thank you, Lydia.
I also have Victor Nyamori from Amnesty International. Victor is becoming a very familiar face on Worldview. Thank you so much for coming in this evening. Mr. Ramadan, allow me to begin with you. You're from the Nubian community, and the expressions that we are seeing in some of the stories that we have just run represent what some of the Nubian community feels, especially here in Kenya. Could you tell us, how did the Nubian community get to a point where they feel they are stateless?
Well, it all started some 150 years ago. In fact, our forefathers came into this country in the 1870s. They came in through the British Imperial East Africa. And subsequently, they were recruited into the Kenya African Rifles, King's African Rifles, by the way. So that's how they came into this country. They were settled in what we now call Kibra, or better still, Langata, which covers even part of the barracks down at Langata. On the western side, you would have the Jamhuri Park. On the northern side, you have Woodley Estate. On the eastern side, you have...
you have the full map in your head.
Yeah, that's right. So they came in 150 years ago.
From where?
From the Sudan.
Okay.
From the Sudan. They were recruited from the Sudan. And when they were... they came into Kenya, they were settled in this piece of land, which was about 4,197 acres of land. And that's how the name Kibra came about, because it was bushy, it was a jungle full of wild animals, and then they were allowed to settle there. They settled there in those early days, and between 1912 and 1928, the area where they settled was considered a military zone. In 1928, it was demilitarized and then handed over to the civil authorities in this country. And ever since, they have been ruled by the British, who were the colonialists in this country, up to now.
Up to now?
Up to now.
Why does that community feel that they are stateless? Do they have identity cards? Are they recognized as Kenyans?
Well, it's a long story, but it has evolved over time. There was a point when most of the Nubians felt stateless, meaning that they could not have access to ID cards, they could not have passport. Reasons were being given that the British government... Let's start from when the British came in. When the British came in, at the time of independence, one would have expected that there would be a handover of their legacy to the new government, including the Nubians whom they had brought from the Sudan. Up to now, we've been trying to find out what kind of arrangement took place to assimilate us into this country, and there has not been any specific answer. Now, come independence in 1963, things were no better. Because of that situation, we remained as people who... Some people would call us Sudanese, others would call us Kenyans.
In between?
In between.
Okay.
Now, that continued for some time until when the government of the day decided that it was time for the Kenyans to start having IDs. And that's when things became what they are up to now.
So what is the scenario now with the Nubian community? Are they able to get identity cards? Do they still feel like they're stateless? What sort of rights do they have? Because one of the disadvantages of being stateless is some basic rights are denied.
Yes, yes indeed. It's a mixed feeling, depending on who you are, depending on how much you know of your rights. You could either be viewed as a stateless person, or you could be granted the ID. And there is a long process for one to get an identification for this country, first of all, you have to have a birth certificate. You have to go through a vetting process, which happens once a month. And once that has been done, and assuming that you've gone through that, having your birth certificate and also an ID from one of your parents.
Okay,
not
and that is
necessarily
where a
two
lot of
of
people
them.
get problems.
And that's where many people get problems, because it's possible that the parents did not have any ID, in which case then they also ask for the school living certificates, so that it could be established that you have actually been through the educational process of this country before you can get that. Now the problem here is that this happens once a month. And once you've gone through that, it takes about 2 months before you can get an ID. Think of a student who has just finished his Form 4 and maybe is being offered some opportunity elsewhere and has been given a deadline of 2 months or so. So that's a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just hold on, Ramadan. You're not the only people facing this. Victor, stay with me. I'll get you involved in this conversation in just a few minutes. Now, that was the narration of Ramadan of the Nubian community here in Kenya. Let's take Frederick in South Africa asking any country that is willing to take him, asking for citizenship from any country. That's how desperate it can get, because when you're a stateless person, there's so many things, there's so many rights that you are denied. Remember, you can be part of this conversation. Use the hashtag worldview KTN. At Lilash Mojalamu says, actually is asking a question. Kwani, these stateless people, wanaishi wapi, asking where do they live? I'm assuming you've watched some of the stories and there's more coming your way. Then maybe you'll understand that these people really do exist and these people need help. At Confidante says you need to understand the privilege it is to be a citizen of a country. Watch Worldview. Indeed, you can be part of it by using the hashtag Worldview KTN. Allow me to bring in Victor Nyamori, refugee officer from Amnesty International. Victor, you've watched part of this story and we've had these conversations with you. What are some of the circumstances that can make one stateless, apart from what Ramadan has been trying to explain to us?
Thank you very much, Linda, for this opportunity once again. Well, in terms of becoming a stateless is a person who actually does not exist in law. Is a person whose nationality is not recognized. In terms of the circumstances that make person stateless, is either by operation of the law, meaning that a country specifically derive you that opportunity to become a national. There are issues, most of the common circumstances around the world it's because of discrimination. And this has always been to the effect that women are being discriminated to be able to pass nationality to their children and also to their spouses. In Africa, it is one of the major issues that causes...
slow down, Victor.
Yes.
Okay, in Africa, slow down.
Yes, in Africa, actually, it is said it is one of the major issues that causes nationality, because spouses are not able to pass nationality to their other spouses when they get married. Then there are also circumstances where states secede. Example of the South Sudan, example of the Ethiopia and Eritrea situation, where a state was able to, a state was able to break out from a different state. So you find yourself with the people within that specific group, within the borderline of those states. They are not able to identify which country they need to fall on, and most countries don't recognize those people because of certain political reasons. So basically, in terms of other reasons that make persons stateless also, it's because of the denial of a birth certificate. Children born in a country and not being able to access birth certificate in one way or the other will lead to a person not being recognized as a person in that nation. So in that extent also, is able to give an opportunity for somebody to be recognized as a stateless person.
Okay, here's the thing, Victor. At the beginning of this conversation, you made it clear that a stateless person does not exist under the law. Where does that leave someone? You're not recognized at all. What does that do to you? Indeed,
it has been recognized as a global phenomenon. You mentioned 12 million people, and UNHCR has basically been in the forefront on fighting for the stateless person. As much as you are not recognized as a state, within a state as a national of that state, then there is a special opportunity now you should be considered as a stateless, being recognized with that state, with a new status known as stateless person. It's either you are a citizen of that country, or a national, or you are a stateless person. So actually in 2014, UNHCR was given more mandate within the General Assembly to fight to bring out the awareness of stateless persons, calling on states to recognize and access to the 1954 Convention on Statelessness, and also to the reduction of statelessness. So it calls on states, as much as there are people within your country that are recognized as stateless person, you don't recognize as citizen, then you should give them a special consideration as people and consider them as with a new status known as stateless. With this new status, they are still human beings. There are a lot of rights that are still available to any human beings. Right to nationality obviously is there within international law, but a human being is able to be dignified, live a dignified life in a country, be able to live as a normal person in that country.
And that is denied to stateless people.
Yes.
Mr. Ramadan, listening to that, does that give you hope?
Well, I'm a bit confused about this category of stateless people.
Please don't swing.
Who can be in a country and still stateless? I can't understand that. Think of our own country here. If you are stateless and you have no ID, you have no passport, how do you access any building in Nairobi now, with all the security situation as it is? So I would rather you are either a national of one place or you are not. But to be in a country and still be stateless, it doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. Victor is confused. Can you help him?
Indeed. It is a status that is recognized. Is either you are a national of a specific country or not. When, by operation of the law, a country does not recognize you as a national of that country, then you acquire a new status known as stateless person. By the fact that you cannot be able to refer to any state to give you protection.
What he says he doesn't understand is the fact that you can be in a country, but then someone still says, you're stateless, but you're in this particular country. And I remember when I tweeted earlier during the day, and I was telling people the conversation we're going to have today, and I tweeted the story about the gentleman from South Africa. Someone actually asked, you're saying this person is from South Africa, but then at the same time you're saying this person is stateless.
Well, back to the issue of nationality. There are different ways how people get nationality. I'll give you an example of Kenya. Is either one of your parents is a Kenyan or not, as part of the constitution of Kenya. If all your parents are not Kenyans, then it means you cannot be a national in this country, even if you are born in this country. You get me? Then you go to the extent that now the global view of this is that we want to reduce statelessness. It is a recognized phenomenon. And that's why it is uniquely included in our constitution, where children who are found in Kenya, and we are not able to establish where they are from or where their parents are from, then it is duty-bound for Kenya as a state to give them or consider them as a national in that state. Yes.
Mr. Ramadan, as long as both parents are not from Kenya, then there's a problem. Hold on. We need to take a look at some other examples from all over the world. Like I said, this is a global problem. There are around 12 million people worldwide who lack citizenship and basic rights in the country in which they live. The Rohingya have no rights in Burma, and their lives are made impossible by such practices as forced labor, displacement, and systematic physical assault, and sometimes rape. They're not allowed Rohingyas there. Let me see if I can sample some of your tweets that are coming in. Sylvia Jabet says it's shocking, it's terrible, not being able to get basic human rights. Frederick's story is so sad. Collins Kiplimo says not recognized by the law, that is worse than being an orphan. And finally Leshan now says being stateless is to be denied origin and a sense of belonging. And on that story you've just seen, we are trying to get Amal Dechkera. He's an from Equal Rights Trust. He's the head of Statelessness and Nationality Projects. We'll be speaking to him in just a few minutes. He has worked extensively with Rohingyas. We'll try and see if he can help us understand how they got there, what are some of the challenges that they are facing. Let's now bring you closer again home, and we're focusing on Ivory Coast. I do not know my nationality. I know where I was born, but am I from Burkina Faso? Am I from Cote d'Ivoire? Ali was never registered at birth. He no longer has any contact with his family and does not have any documents to prove his identity or nationality. No country recognizes him as a national. He is stateless, and his story is common among many stateless people whose desperate situations make them extremely vulnerable to exploitation. Listen to his struggle to find his place in the world from Cote d'Ivoire, otherwise known as Ivory Coast. Take a look.
Mimi mtea bengu la mtoko la sireno dundo ndo mzi ampami ni amoro akika pa mora akika mai fare mpami sireno bon bila ni to wewa tumam tumam ya panga tilai lam tumno ke ampar wewa tum baram da kin kamyo tuma ara suma halin no musunda amma takra to bon musa da bon si c'était voyembo tuma pour un pata to autour pièce ya to bala mo tuma falan ko na falan to ne pièce ramba ba fo tal ligini mi ngata mana on dit quoi monnaie quoi la mtn bon quoi là c'est un papier tu veux pas faire mais un pata pièce va tuma pour un pata moi même tout matigrizi bon à moi même taille tout y a tout taille parler bon à mettre carrément en défense pour à nombre en plus même nan deket nan to on sac ne voyez no bon voilà mais pas libre neda voilà m'tava l'ambor.
I told you, this is a global problem. Many of you may not even be aware that stateless people exist, but indeed they do exist. 12 million of them. There are concerted efforts to help them. We'll try and look at some of the efforts that are being fronted to try and help them. And as we speak, we're trying to get Amal Dechikera from Equal Rights Trust. He's the head of Statelessness and Nationality Projects, and he'll help us to understand what efforts are being put in place. What sort of experiences do stateless people have? You're watching Worldview. Remember, you can be part of this conversation. Use the hashtag Worldview KTN. Be part of this conversation. Like I told you, we look at global issues and we let you in to be part of this conversation. We'll be right back after this short break. Me. Amal?
Hi.
You're watching Worldview tonight. We're focusing on stateless people. Let's bring in Amal Dechikera from the Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion. He's joining us. Amal, are you in the United Kingdom?
Yes, I am based in the UK. That's right.
Great, Amal. Thank you so much for joining us on this show. Like I mentioned, you've worked extensively with the Rohingyas. What sort of experiences do they go through now that they're being labeled as stateless?
Well, the Rohingya experience is probably one of the most extreme forms of suffering and persecution that stateless people would experience. I think it's a useful example to highlight the challenges that statelessness makes us face, but we must bear in mind that it is an extreme. So the story with the Rohingya is that they've been living in Myanmar for many years, many centuries, but they are an ethnic and a religious minority. They are Muslims, and ethnically they are closely related to those from the Chittagong region of Bangladesh. And because of these very visible differences, as well as some historical facts, which I won't go into right now, the Rohingya have faced a lot of discrimination and exclusion by the Burmese state. It culminated in 1982 when a new Citizenship Act was passed, and as a result of the Citizenship Act, the Rohingya were made stateless. And after this, their statelessness has been used as an excuse, as the basis for continuing to discriminate against them, exclude them, persecute them. So it's a long-winded story of many decades of immense suffering, immense exclusion and vulnerability that a particular community has faced. In 2012, there was a lot of violence against the Rohingya again, and this captured the attention of the media, the global media. Then we saw earlier in this year as well, there was a situation where there were Rohingya refugees trying to enter Thailand, enter Malaysia, but they were being refused entry by these countries. And this again underscores the plight of stateless people, not only in the country that they're from, but also in countries that they flee to. Yeah, like I said, that's a very extreme example, but certainly one that is a good example of the types of challenges that we face.
Amal, one of the guests I have in studio, that is Victor Nyamori, was basically trying to explain what it means to be stateless, and he says you do not exist under the law. So obviously, Amal, this makes some of these people vulnerable to some sorts of abuses. If you were to look at what this now makes them vulnerable to, what would you say that is?
I mean, it's
human trafficking and all sorts of abuses around the world.
Yeah, it's difficult to generalize because I mean, each human experience is unique, and one of the I think the disservices we do to stateless people is we look at them as a group, and in doing so we actually undermine and forget their humanity. So the way statelessness impacts on different people in different contexts would vary. Certainly in the extreme context like the Rohingya, it would result in persecution, it could result in trafficking. In the majority of contexts, it's a much more, a much less dramatic kind of vulnerability that they face. So they face difficulties accessing education, accessing healthcare, mundane things that you and I take for granted, opening a bank account, getting a job. But things which, if you actually have difficulty accessing those things, you can imagine how difficult your life would be. I mean, one of the most difficult stories I've come across in my work researching statelessness is of mothers who actually have citizenship, but who cannot pass on their citizenship to their children because there are gender discriminatory nationality laws in that particular country, and who fear that once they die, their children will not even have the right to inherit their property. So you have parents with this immense kind of angst and this knowing that their children will have to continue to try and survive without the only protection and access to normalcy that they have in the world, which is through their parents who have citizenship. That's just one example.
Amal, briefly before I let you go, do you think enough is being done to help stateless people in the world?
A lot is being done, and in November 2014, a campaign was launched by the UNHCR to end statelessness in 10 years, so by 2024. And this campaign has gathered a lot of momentum. The media is talking a lot more about stateless now than it was before. I mean, this show is an example of that. There are a lot more organizations, individuals, governments that are aware of the issue. And one of the big challenges with statelessness was this lack of awareness, because it has been a hidden issue. It's been an issue that hasn't been brought to the political agenda because the stateless are disenfranchised and therefore unable to speak on behalf of themselves in political arenas. Okay. That is changing, and I definitely see in the last few years that I've been working on this issue an increase in momentum and increase in understanding. Whether it's enough, I don't know. I mean, history will judge us on that. But certainly we are moving in the right direction. Okay. Having said that, there are things happening in the world today which are creating new cases of statelessness. We hear of countries introducing new laws that would deny people of their citizenship if they are suspected of engaging in terrorist activities. This could result in statelessness. Then we have the huge Syria crisis, which is a real threat to statelessness for tens of thousands of people. So whilst on the one hand we see that there is momentum, on the other hand there are new cases of statelessness and new causes of statelessness emerging even today, which is a worrying thought, because it means that whatever progress we make on the one hand, we are losing on the other.
Amal, thank you so much for speaking to us on Worldview. Amal Dechikera from the Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion. Sir, thank you so much for your insights and indeed helping us to understand the scenario, the situation of stateless people. There are around 12 million in the world. Thank you so much. So in studio, we have Ismail Ramadan from the Nubian community here in Kenya. Thank you for staying with us. And of course, Victor Nyamori from Amnesty International, as well, is becoming a familiar face in this show. Mr. Ramadan, if you've listened into Amal and he was talking about what countries are putting in place to try and sort this out, if your community was supposed to be recognized as citizens in Kenya, what would you want the government to do, or whoever it is that's in charge to do, to ensure that your people, one, are recognized as citizens of Kenya, and two, get all the privileges and all the basics that any other citizen in the country can get?
From my community's point of view, Linda, I think we are beyond statelessness as a community. We are Kenyans. Okay. We have no doubt that we are Kenyans. Having been here for over 150 years.
That qualifies you to be citizens
of course, of course.
Okay.
But the question is, are we enjoying the rights of being Kenyans?
Are you?
We are not. Land is a basic right. Land is a fact of production. Land is a source of wealth. If you cannot have access to a piece of land, if you do not have security of tenure for a piece of land, how do you develop? And that's why this question of statelessness hangs over our head, because simply we do not have the security of land that we think is ours. Through the successive regimes that we've had since independence, none of the government has ever told us that we are stateless.
They've never told you that you're stateless?
There is no official position that we are stateless. So we must assume and we must accept the fact that we are citizens of this country. What we demand is that we should be given our rights. The basic right of security of tenure should come first, because that will show that there's recognition of the fact that we are Kenyans here, in the absence of anybody telling us you are not Kenyans.
Okay. Victor, you've listened into his arguments and he says there's no direct communication telling them they don't belong to Kenya, they're not citizens of Kenya. Assuming I find myself in a scenario where I'm being called stateless, what do I do? What can someone do?
Yet you have your ID, you have your passport.
You have your ID, you have your passport, but you're not enjoying the rights that everyone else does.
I mean, for the Nubian case is very unique, because in 2011, the Open Society, through the support of local organizations, were able to bring a case in the African Committee of Experts on the issues of nationality and statelessness for their children. And one of the issues that was brought up is the fact that Kenya was not able to grant them citizenship, and thus making them at risk of becoming stateless. And one of the positive decisions for that, and that is one of the factors that brought about a lot of development in issues of nationality in Africa, was the fact that Kenya was found not to be recognizing rights of children by discriminating them and not giving them access to birth certificate. But in the other extent, I mean, a lot of progress have been made towards this. Amnesty International have been monitoring the situation, and this has called for, like currently, in Africa we are currently developing a draft protocol on the right to nationality and statelessness. So this will be a protocol calling on African states to develop laws that reduce statelessness, recognize people that are stateless and also give opportunity for stateless person to be able to acquire nationality in those countries.
All right. While we're having this conversation, I want us to cross all the way to Lebanon, because this is indeed a global problem. Let's take you to a story there. And all mothers want the best for their children. And Amal from Lebanon is no different. She fell in love with a stateless man. They got married after 14 years and had 2 children. Unfortunately, Amal's children are stateless because under Lebanese law, she cannot pass on her nationality to them. Remember, this is what Victor was trying to explain. Her daughter Rama thinks this is not fair.
I don't like to be stateless because it is not fair.
أولادي ما معهم جنسية لأنه جدهم ما معهم وبيهم ما معهم، والأولاد ما قادرة أعمل لهم شيء. وأنا لحد الآن إنه عندنا الست اللبنانية عامة بلبنان لا عم تقدر تعطي لجوزها شيء ولا لأولادها.
All my friends go to places and I could not go to them. I feel sad because I don't have ID and all my friends have ID. I want my job when I grow up is to be a baby doctor, because when the baby is sick I want to help them.
راما ما بحس لها مستقبل. راما أنا كمستقبل ما بحس لهم مستقبل. إذا ضلوا هيك بلا هويات ما بحس لهم مستقبل أولادي. لازم نحس كلياتنا إنه وضع عدمين الجنسية يتغير، ليصير لهم مركز، ليصير لهم كيان، لحتى يعيشوا بين الناس.
There are concerted efforts to address this. In July this year, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, that is Antonio Guterres, called on countries to end the plight of some 12 million stateless people caught in what he described as a limbo, denied basic human rights because no state will grant them citizenship. Guterres called on nations to do everything they can for these people to be recognized. Listen in.
Not enough awareness. Many people do not even know what statelessness means. Everybody knows what a refugee is, but I mean, what is it to be a stateless person? And also because sometimes states, for reasons of national sovereignty, are very reluctant to engage in an international commitment in relation to questions of nationality that are in the very center of their sovereignty concerns. But it is a dramatic problem. Imagine yourself, you are not here in London, you are in the slums of a city in the developing world. You have no nationality, you have no ID card, you have no access to health services, you cannot send your children to the school, you cannot have property, you cannot have a legal job. You can be arrested by the police and detained indefinitely. I mean, it's a question of human dignity, and it is also an enormous amount of suffering. It is essential that having 12 to 15 million, it's difficult to estimate the exact number of people in these circumstances. It's a huge human rights problem. It is unacceptable that it remains unknown, and it is essential that we raise awareness and that we make states understand that they need to do everything they can for these people to be recognized, for their rights to be recognized, and for a solution to be found for them, which means for a nationality, for them to have a nationality, to have a country they can call theirs.
Citizens of nowhere, stateless. That is the conversation we have been having on Worldview tonight. Let's keep this conversation going. Use the hashtag Worldview KTN. Allow me to thank my guests in studio. Ismail Ramadan, if there was one final thing that you'd want to see done concerning stateless people, what would that be?
Security of tenure for the land they have been living in for 150 years.
Land is your main issue. Victor?
Thank you very much. Amnesty International has been calling for the right to nationality, recognition of the right to nationality. Every citizen, every person in this world has a right to nationality, and state has a responsibility to reduce the issue of statelessness.
Okay.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on Worldview tonight and indeed helping us to understand what statelessness is all about. Like we said, not very many people understand what that is. So I'll wind this show with a look once again at the Super Bowl, and I'm trying to get all the Super Bowls that we began this show with. Citizens of Nowhere describes the 12 million people who are described as stateless, saying no person is illegal. No person essentially should be illegal. No person should be told they're not a citizen, their nationality is not known, and no person should be denied residence. And no person should actually have to say this about anywhere in the world. Even birds have rights. A bird can build a nest, give birth, bring food to their children, and raise them until they're ready to fly. We do not have basic rights like this. This is painful. Thank you so much for watching Worldview, and that is where we leave it. I'm Linda Ogutu.